product folks, experience folks, that kind of thing. Oh, that's going to be, can it? Okay. Okay, cool. Sort of. So that's in case you didn't hear me the first time, you'll be able to hear it the second time. Okay, well, I'll keep talking and he'll figure it out. So when Tokes and I were talking about this presentation and deciding what to do, I was asking, you know, what do product people want to hear about? And he was saying, you know, there's ideas that we have about accessibility and, you know, how do we make it cost effective? How do we do this? How do we do that? And just bringing up notions that product folk have about accessibility. And I thought, why not tackle that head on? One thing about me is I'm a very direct person. It's probably one reason why I'll never truly be a Kiwi. So sorry if it's a bit confronting, but I thought it would be really effective to, yeah, just address those ideas head on. And we're an intimate group as well here, so hopefully we could have a conversation as well and with the people online as well about accessibility. So, are you gonna work, please? Yeah. All right, so before we dive in, there are two assumptions that I have that I do want to hold on to. The first one is that you are a good person, okay? I truly do believe that product people and tech people in general, we really are trying to do the best that we can do. We really want to create technology that benefits everybody, that everybody can use, that everybody can feel comfortable with and included with, that performs well as meets needs. So I do very genuinely think that that's true. And this talk isn't about making people feel guilty or anything. I don't think that the reason that we don't succeed with accessibility is because we don't care. I don't think that's true. The second assumption that I have is that product people specifically have many priorities and stakeholders that you're trying to juggle and balance all the time. And it's this conflict between the juggling of these stakeholders and priorities and our dreams and hopes. And it's bringing those two things together where the conflict and tension kind of lies. And again, we're trying to do both of those things at the same time. So those are the assumptions that I'm carrying about you all. And I hope that those things are true, or at least I'm going to continue to believe that those things are true. Okay, so let's dive into it. So I have a whiteboard here because I want to actually hear from you. What do you feel are some barriers? I'm going to go over there, so I'll just go to the spot now so you can turn it. Okay, cool. So what to you are the barriers to being able to implement accessibility?
Cost of additional discovery.
Okay, so like financial cost?
Yeah.
Or time. Okay, so I'll just write cost. Second. Okay, so money and time, right? Additional discovery. I hope you can all read that. I'll also read it. So yeah, for people online is the cost of additional discovery. What else? What's else is stuff in? Sorry? Knowledge. Cool. What else? Okay. So priority, I'll just say, yeah.
It's hard to calculate a good ROI.
Mm-hmm. So calculate ROI. Yep. Calculate ROI.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to be really cold about it, say, well, there's going to be people doing it.
Yeah, yeah. Do I need to repeat what you were saying? Just it's on me. But yeah. Well, yeah. I just will. Just anyway. Yeah. The idea though of how to calculate the ROI. At the end of the day, we're all working at businesses or working in governments that's trying to serve as many people as possible. So, and yeah, it's not a judgment on you. Like I said, I do genuinely believe that we're all good people and we're trying to do our best, right? So it's not that we don't care. It's the realities of what we're facing. So yeah, what's the return on investment for accessibility? Yeah.
It's your marketplace.
Sorry?
It's your market. It's like sustainability. Until it becomes a marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to have this.
So there's not a market push?
The legislation needs to sort of push.
Yeah. Lack of legislation. Cool.
of buy-in from the stakeholders. They may not value it.
Yep, lack of stakeholder buy-in.
On the flip side,
Mhm.
maybe it's like attaching lack of knowledge, but I thought that what you said was more like lack of knowledge of best practice. But on the flip side, there's lack of knowledge of how to sell it to stakeholders.
Okay, yeah.
Is there a lack of buy-in, or are we just not selling it good enough?
So lack of stakeholder buy-in slash like selling, right? Like selling ability. I'll just
Yeah, they're convincing our
Yeah.
yeah.
So that goes back to your market. I mean, for me, the sustainability one is a good example. Like until the market said, so 10 years ago, no one would do anything sustainable, and now it's huge because there was a real shift. And
So a lack of market push.
Yeah.
Demand, that's the word. Lack of market demand.
Is there really a lack of market demand though? Or is it just like we can't quantify it and we don't know the
It's-
stats for our products?
It's so good that we're here for a whole hour to talk about it.
Regulation.
well,
Yeah.
that's why
Like
Yeah.
in the public sector, you had right?
Yeah.
legislation drives the market, and then market people pay. So in the case of education, in my space, legislation will drive it. No one pays for my products, not web, for example. But my customers have accessibility issues.
Yeah, I think it's legitimate that they're two separate things. There's market demand and legislation. Those two separate things can drive.
Or addressing all of the preferred needs for everyone.
So is it because you said technical and then you said
Feasibility,
okay?
addressing the diversity of needs.
Those are two things I feel.
They are.
Yeah. So should we split them up?
If you like.
So technical feasibility. Technical feasibility. It's really annoying that my company has the word accessibility in it because like I have gotten slightly better at spelling the word accessibility, but it still takes a lot of time. And then the second half of what you said was diversity of needs.
I think the technical feasibility sounds kind of like it depends where you're starting from. You're starting from like a pretty maybe somewhat established business, and you haven't got that from a guy. That's required.
Yep. So just for the mic, just a discussion about the technical feasibility and it's how big it is depends on where you start. Yeah.
I think it's cost of effort is what I like. It might be feasible, but it still costs time and effort. So the ROI is like thinking about the total return for that cost of effort, but something you really must have when you're products.
Yep.
And for
Cool.
the approach, speed to market's really important. So they'll go, what can we not do to get the market to prove this thing's even got legs?
Cool.
And then coming back later, it's not harder.
Yeah.
Speed. So speed to market. Okay.
And maybe it relates to lack of market demand, but the people who have accessibility needs may be less likely to be able to ask about those or speak about those. Yeah.
So the voice
of the customer may not be as loud.
Okay. Nice. So lack of customer voice. Customer voice. Okay. Lack of customer voice.
Maybe lack of requirements because I have worked markets where it just can't. They just in order to have a product you have to take up people at a minimum.
Yeah.
They were basically
Was that legislative or was that for other reasons? Okay, I'll put it lack of legislation slash require, like, because I guess market requirements you're thinking of, or
I guess it was more that I worked on some part. It was not the question. Do we make our product that's already active? So
oh, okay.
you couldn't make it
Would we say culture?
Yeah.
Maybe?
I love it. Like, you say that that's like a need. I mean, I want to be, it's a bit a horrible thing to say, but
We'll talk about that.
I mean, there isn't it. And the irony is, if companies are making products which aren't accessible, that means they don't understand like, we need to, everything should be accessible. It's like the conversation from the door. The fact that a building in New Zealand doesn't allow a wheelchair to go through, in our building, we need a disabled foot. It's like, that's legislation, but it's also the fact that the market, is there enough people to actually deliver on that? But then reality is, how is it possible that these products have been delivered so long? Because the need is...
So precedent?
I think it's education.
Okay.
Fundamental education as a culture, so what do you see?
So there's culture, there's knowledge. Yeah, I'm just educate.
Yeah, so I mean, if you are a startup and you're applying, your MVP will be focusing on the biggest market share you can do in this space. No, that's the basic. The business is achieve what you can and then scale. No? So you're not going to focus on a niche. That's the reality. No?
Is it?
Well,
I think there's a few different things that you're saying, and there are a few different things, like talking about market demand, talking about culture, talking about preconceived notions of what disability is, who it's affected, the fact that it isn't it is a niche, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I wonder if we captured that, or if what you're saying, I guess, is there are assumptions around accessibility.
I think there's big assumptions.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Like we overassume.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything else?
Yeah. To some degree, I wonder, maybe it's like that, but discrimination, for example, for us, we sell the businesses, we sell the enterprises. So if our customers have their own practices where they don't hire people with disability in the first place, then they don't turn around into a need or demand on us to say, hey, you need to make the products accessible because we've got to have staff who have different accessibility needs as well. So if there's, I guess, a certain degree of maybe bias in the facing your own customers that you're selling to the business.
Yeah, that's good. So, I mean, that could fall under culture, like if you're selling to certain places and they're like, oh, it's not what we do, kind of thing. So that kind of falls into culture, preconceived notions, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's not a priority to a customer, it's not a negative priority.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. And then we'll move on.
Cultural awareness of ethnicity needs.
Okay. Yeah.
So different accessibility needs for different ethnicities.
Okay, cool.
And then
yeah.
Matching expectations to services delivery ability. So I think we have capability.
Like knowledge?
I think it was more like expectations of what you should do and your ability to do
it. We can add that. Does it make sense to add that? So like product feasibility?
You're saying services delivery ability, but maybe they mean ability to put it into the product. There might be this expectation that this 100% compliant thing.
Oh, okay.
We have the ability to go that whole way.
Okay, so we did technical feasibility, right? Yeah. Okay, so technical feasibility and service. Okay, cool. Okay. Well, no, we won't talk about that today. But the answer to that, the question was, does it limit design flair? And the answer is no. Yeah. Okay, we have more juice, so we're gonna move on. Okay, the point is that these are all the thoughts and ideas that we have, and the barriers that exist, or at least the barriers that we think exist. And so we're gonna talk about all of these things. Cool. All right. So what's next? All right. First, we're just gonna talk really quickly about what accessibility is. Yeah. Just so that we're all on the same page about accessibility. I like to compare it to the physical world. When we are constructing a building, there are things that we can do that make that building more or less accessible. So things like elevators, things like ramps outside, that we think about when we're building that building. Same is true for the web. When we're building it, things that we can consider like color and the way that we're writing our code and the things that we're designing can be more or less accessible. And just like the physical world, there are benefits to lots of people. So an elevator, for example, or a ramp, let's take a ramp, might have been initially developed for somebody in a wheelchair. But I think it's pretty easy to conceive of how it benefits other people as well, right? If you have a stroller, for example, or you have difficulty taking large steps, right? So a ramp is easier for you. Carrying heavy things like that. So in the physical world, there are things that we've created that was maybe had specific people in mind, but actually ends up benefiting a whole bunch of people. The same is true with the web as well. So when we think about web accessibility, or when we're talking about it, we're talking about a whole host of things, actually, from color to the code semantics themselves, to forms and videos and images and all that kind of stuff. There's a whole bunch of different things that we're talking about when we're talking about web accessibility. All right. And then just also just to talk about the legal requirements really quickly, because I'm sure it will come up. In New Zealand specifically, the government is required to meet the WCAG, you might have heard that word, you don't have to remember that from here on, the Web Accessibility Guidelines. So the government needs to meet that requirement. Private sector is a little bit murkier. We are in Wellington, so a lot of us are catering to the government. So if we are providing services to the government, they need to be accessible as well, because they are like owned by the government. And we are seeing increasing worldwide as well, lawsuits and stuff. So the demand is only increasing, as well as if you're at an organization who has intentions to or is already the legislative requirements are much higher internationally than it is here. We're working on it here, but in the meantime, that's kind of the legal landscape that we're living in right now. The question is, what level does the government have to meet? The level is 2.1 AA, if that means anything to you. Yeah.
making demands as well.
So that's more than 1/3.
Yeah, it could be more than 1/3, but at a very minimum, great, more than 1/3. So the idea here is that money talks, right? $5.6 billion per year disposable income of disabled people. Companies as well that are mature in their accessibility see 28% greater revenue than their inaccessible counterparts. And that actually kind of makes sense because, you know, with accessibility comes SEO and like improved SEO and improved UX. The customer acquisition cost is lower. If you think about the target, the segment group that is disabled people, they're very similar to your current target segment group. So you're not having to do additional research, additional discovery to understand them. They're speaking the same language, they come from the same culture, they're based in the same locations as your primary target group. So the cost to acquire them is a lot lower than breaking into a whole new market or a whole new segment, for example. The customer retention is also greater. Disabled users are known to be sticky users, as in they stick. And if you think about it, if you're a user who's used to encountering barriers all the time online, and then you find, say, a grocery store that you can actually do your groceries on, you're going to stick with that grocery store, right? So in that way, they're very loyal customers. So the retention is a lot higher when it comes to that kind of client, customer base. And you can win new contracts. I know companies that have won work specifically because they are accessible and they meet the accessibility requirements. And that's both here in Australia and abroad as well. So all of that being said, there's a lot to gain by acknowledging the people that already exist as disabled users. And it's not just what there is to gain, but there's a lot to lose as well. What you're losing out on is that revenue of targeting that new valuable market that has money. You're losing that improved UX. You're losing the opportunity to save on those costs when it comes to customer acquisition and retention. That's tapping into the boomer spending and just meeting boomer needs as well. You're losing out on that. And finally, the competitive advantage. You know, we know people in this room and online, like Wellington's a small community, a small tech community. So we know, you know, who the competitors are. We know what organizations exist. What are they doing for accessibility? And how can you stand out against your competitors? Accessibility is a really great way to do that as well. So when we come back to our myth of we don't have disabled users, or disabled users are a niche, or, you know, they don't come visit our website anyway, I would say that rather, it's not so much, I would say rather that it's disabled users are a valuable segment of your current and your potential user base. Cool? All right, let's go to myth number 2. Accessibility is expensive. That's the first one that we talked about, right? And we actually mentioned it a few more times, but feasibility, cost of effort, ROI, that kind of stuff. And you know what? There is some truth to that. Accessibility is expensive, especially when it's not considered early on in the process. So I have on screen a set of stairs, and basically, if you can imagine like this building that we have here, right? Imagine they built the building and they're all done and they're all proud of themselves, and then someone's like, oh shit, we forgot to put in the elevator. And that's all of a sudden when we're having conversations about, well, do we really need an elevator? How many people are really going to use the elevator anyway? Maybe it's not that big of a group anyway. People who actually want to come here, actually, they don't need the elevator. They're going to make their way here anyway, right? Those kinds of conversations keep coming up. And it's also just expensive, right? Trying to retrofit that elevator into this building is going to be really costly in money, as well as effort, and just like frustration. And the same is true with the web, trying to retrofit. If anybody has ever tried to get a designer to change their designs, yeah, that's really difficult because once things are set in motion, there's no other alternative in that kind of sense. So this is reflected in something called the rule of 10. Has anybody heard of the rule of 10 before? Some yeses, some no's. That's cool. So the rule of 10 is the idea that that bugs are more costly exponentially by 10 as you move along the product lifecycle. So when we start in the requirement phase, for example, the cost to fix the bug is $1, let's say. But then when we move into design and we catch it there, it becomes $10, et cetera, et cetera. When we finally move into production, that's the most expensive it is to fix a bug. And in this case, we're talking about accessibility. Accessibility is just another bug, right? So let's break that down and let's understand that, right? So I have on screen like a very simplistic version of the product lifecycle from requirements, design, dev to testing. And so when, let's say, testing is the one who finds the bug, they raise it, they're like, hey, this is not keyboard accessible. So they raise it and then they go talk to the devs, and the devs are like, I don't know, it wasn't in the requirements. So then they go talk to design and they go talk to product and say, hey, it wasn't in the requirements to fix this bug, so what should we do about it? And then we might actually even have to go even earlier than that, talk to stakeholders, talk to clients, and pull them in. I've seen this happen with colors that aren't accessible. We have to go back, and once that color palette is approved, you get all the bigwigs back in, and they're all now have to talk about the colors again, and it is a pain in the butt. And so it's just a lot more expensive, a lot more time consuming, and just generally unpleasant to find bugs later in that process. Versus if we include accessibility from the beginning. So if we have accessibility included in the requirements, for example, it starts out there and moves into design, they include it there. Dev sees that it's in the requirements, all right, they code it in. Testing, if now they see it there, they can test it along, and everybody before them has already made sure that's there. So when it gets to their testing, they can just tick off that box, and accessibility is included in that process already.
Except accessibility is not binary, right? Like it's a scale of things you can do through the ABC, like the different levels of accessibility. So you have to make decisions about
what kind. And we'll talk about that in our next one, about like what kind of decisions we're making around accessibility. But for the simplistic example, we'll say that we've had some sort of agreement of what we're trying to do, that we want to make sure that all the colors are accessible or that everything is keyboard accessible, and that's set in the requirements. And then so basically having it in that process from the beginning, though, makes it more business as usual. It's easier to implement and more seamless. A really key thing that is worth mentioning is that accessibility is often just about returning to best practices. You'll be surprised by how much of my consulting that I do for developers is just telling them how to use HTML properly. It's also, when it comes to like design, for example, it makes things a little bit more objective, right? Like, oh, I like this design. No, I like this design. Well, which design is better? Well, that one's not good because the colors can't be seen, and it just kind of knocks it off, and then it just makes it a little bit more objective of just like, this design is objectively better because people can actually use it. So it's a lot to do with coming back to best practice. So one of the things that we talked about was the technical feasibility we mentioned, right? And a lot of that technical feasibility, when we're thinking about it ahead of time, makes it feasible, because it's like, when I'm coding, for example, I can make decisions about how I'm going to go about building that thing. And I will pick the decision that is more accessible rather than that other one. Versus if I left it to the end, then I have to go back. And that's where that technical feasibility starts to become a question. So this whole concept is called, by the way, shifting left. So it's the idea that the accessibility requirement has been shifted left. So we're not leaving it to testing at the end of that process, but we're moving it as early as possible as we can in that process, all the way to the left-hand side. So it's called shift left. And when we don't shift left, that's when things are expensive. So you're not wrong about that. It's also when things are labor intensive, when frankly it's annoying when that comes up. And then that's when also when it comes to the priorities, when it starts to get shifted down in the priorities, it starts to become optional of like, well, we were going to do one thing or the other. And that other thing sometimes is the thing that wins over this one. Versus when we do shift left, it's a lot more cost effective, like I was talking about. It's a lot easier because, like I was saying with the designers, for example, like we're still in the ideation phase. We're still in that phase of coming up with different examples and different mock-ups. So it's not difficult to make a change because we're taking feedback in any way. It's a lot more fun as well. A lot of people who are into accessibility like it because it's a new avenue for them to expand on their practice. So if as a developer, you're looking for a way to grow and learn, or a designer, you want to do something different, a lot of people find it really exciting because it's a way to deepen their knowledge in their own practice. So it's actually fun in that way. And then finally, it becomes a no-brainer, right? We're not having those kinds of conversations anymore. Yeah? So when it comes to this myth about accessibility is expensive, really accessibility is economical when it's included from the start. All right, number 3, and I'm only tackling 3, but hopefully we're going to reach all of those in that third one. Number 3 is that accessibility is hard. The technical feasibility, how do we get it in? How do we convince our stakeholders? How do we make sure that we know what we're doing? There's just a lot to do. There's accessibility. I can't remember who's saying there's so much to do and to think about when it comes to accessibility. So what do we usually do when we have a task that's very big? We break it down, exactly. You break it down into smaller chunks. And that's the same with accessibility. Like I said at the top, accessibility covers a whole bunch of different things. And so we could break it down in that way. The reality is you're not going to be able to build an accessible product starting tomorrow. Or, starting you can, but you're not going to be able to get it tomorrow. It's going to take practice. It's going to take work. It's going to take learning, collaboration, all that kind of stuff. So instead, you want to be breaking it down, and we get all the advantages that we do when we break things down about reaching milestones and all that kind of stuff. So here's some tips about chunking accessibility. You can break it down in terms of different areas of accessibility. So from keyboard, I was talking a lot about keyboard and colors, or forms, or your videos. Getting transcripts and captions for your video. That's going to be one sprint that we just do that. You can focus on that way. Another way you can focus on is specific systems in your product. So you think of your design system, you can focus just on that, or you focus on new features. So from here on out, we build in an accessible way, or you highlight a certain user flow, that kind of thing. So pick one of those and go with that. I have highlighted the systems and keyboard accessibility. If you were going to pick ones, those would be my recommendations. Keyboard navigation is the number one thing that I check for when it comes to accessibility. It's the thing, and we don't have time to get into it, but it's basically the thing that has the highest barriers for the most amount of people. And it really has also the highest education and greatest domino effect and ripple effect on your teams and everything. So I think it's a really strategic thing in a lot of different ways. And it's usually the thing that I encourage teams to focus on first. Or you focus on things like your common user flows, that kind of thing, is also a really smart way to implement accessibility, to get stakeholders involved as well, because they can understand why your key user flow needs to be as accessible as possible.
And it's a good example of this, not just disabled people, lots of people use keyboard shortcuts, and keyboard
exactly,
and yeah.
That's why, yeah. How do you go about doing this? I have a quote on screen that's from a report about accessibility that says that the single biggest step an organization can take may simply be to build a digital accessibility roadmap. You're product people, so I'm sure you love a plan, right? And strategy and all that stuff. So I encourage you to create a roadmap. This is going to really help pick one of those things and hone in on it. It helps you establish clear goals and prevent that scope creep of being oh, we're going to do all the accessibility things. You really stay focused in. It allows you to measure success and then bring that to your stakeholders and your leadership and show, hey, look at what we've done so far, and this is what we have planned coming up to do. So you're showing them that you're not just kind of machine gunning it and kind of just trying to do everything, but you really are being thoughtful about it. That's something that stakeholders can get behind. And things like staying motivated and documenting it. Documentation is boring, but really important. A lot of times I see people who are really passionate about accessibility, like you all here, and you go back to your organizations and you start doing it, but then naturally, you go off, find another opportunity, and with you, the accessibility initiative leaves as well. And so the organization is left starting at square one. So by having a roadmap, you're leaving a legacy so that even when you naturally go or other people naturally go, they can still take up the mantle and keep it moving. So I have a free resource. It's for a roadmap template. I encourage you to download it. It's free. I do ask you for your email. That's just so I can kind of like keep in touch with you if you want. You can also unsubscribe. I think I have useful content, so you know, you can grab it if you want. There's a link there. It's QR code with a dot in between /ProductTank. Yeah, so grab that if you want. But it encourages you to create that roadmap and also to like check in and keep that roadmap updated is the value I think that it brings, and like the value that you want to have for roadmaps, so it doesn't just sit on the shelf. Okay, and then finally, just tips for road mapping. So someone said knowledge was their second one. So my answer to that is that you don't need to be an expert. If anything, collaborate with other people and come in saying, hey, I don't really know much about accessibility, but I want to. I want to learn more about it. And I think you'll be surprised by how many other people at your organization are. There's a lot of pockets in organizations, and it's really inspiring to bring everybody together, and then you can learn together. So you really don't need to be an expert, and please don't let that like feeling of perfectionism, and we really want to create good products and we want to be our best selves when we do things, and you really don't. My other tips is being specific. So the idea of putting in a requirements, make this feature accessible, is just not a good AC. And it's actually problematic because it lets you tick that box of, yeah, we're doing our best to be accessible, but it doesn't actually allow you to do anything. So again, having a concept of what you're trying to achieve and say, we're trying to do keyboard accessibility, for example, and then use specific in that thing, in that story, say, when we're building this thing, the person is able to click on the button with the enter or spacebar, for example. And then that's like, okay, cool. That can be programmed in and that can be tested as well. Collaborate with your team. That one's pretty straightforward. The last thing is to make sure that you're providing progress updates to leadership. So people talked about like talking to stakeholders and getting stakeholder buy-in. This is an element that we often forget, to make sure that we're giving those updates, those milestones, and that's what's going to get people bought in and encouraged by it. They're going to start taking credit for it and saying that they were interested in accessibility all along, and they were always really supportive of this initiative. So be humble about that. But if you're looking to get that stakeholder buy-in, you really have to keep bringing it up to them. And it doesn't have to be annoying, but it's just in your updates, as you're bringing your updates about other things, you also mention, and we succeeded in accomplishing this goal, or we didn't accomplish it just yet. And so we have this plan in place to try to do that. So when it comes to the myth number 3 of accessibility is hard, I would say rather that accessibility can easily be broken down into manageable chunks, just like anything. So what did we learn today, my friends? We learned that disabled users are in fact a valuable segment in our user base, that accessibility is economical when we include it at the beginning, and then also it can be easily broken down into chunks so that we can actually implement it slowly but surely. Last thing, I promise, if I'm going to leave you on anything, one of the things that I really love about accessibility is the idea of progress, not perfection. Accessibility is probably one of the only areas where doing small changes can have a really big impact. I don't think there's really a lot of other things that we can say that, even the smallest thing moves the needle ever so slightly. And so I think for that reason alone, accessibility is worth giving a shot at, doing your best at it, having that small impact that you can, that is actually ends up being a big impact. And that's me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Are there any questions online?
I had one question from our online audience.
Yeah.
So they were talking about a roadmap being great as a first step maybe for a company, but then they were talking about the extent to which it no longer becomes this parallel stream of work, but it's just a best practice. Just the engineering team say, well, we always build it this way. This is just what we do. It's like testing, right? Like you always unit test stuff, and maybe you always make things accessible, and it doesn't warrant its own roadmap anymore.
Yeah, that's the dream. Yeah, is that it's just part of business as usual. Yeah, and that's when it becomes really easy and really natural and part of what we do and part of the culture of just, it stops being an argument and a conversation. And so, yeah, so the roadmap is to start us off, because a lot of organizations, only 3% of organizations in New Zealand and Australia are meeting accessibility standards. So unless that person is part of the 3%, yeah, it's a good place to start. Yeah. Yeah.
As you get these small chunks, small successes out, do you have any tips on how to measure the results, to measure the impact of that work that you're getting done?
Yeah. Repeat it. Yeah. So as we're getting those small chunks out, how do we show the return that we're getting? It is a bit tricky. You can collaborate with your marketing team and see what the stats are. For example, a form is kind of a straightforward one. How like what's the drop off rate for the forms, and then before and after we made these changes. That's a good way to do it. Site traffic as well, especially if you're changing things like headings and page like logic. So like the code underneath, it helps improve that. Like I know This American Life, for example, they saw, I think it was like a 73%, no, that was a different one. Anyway, This American Life saw like exponential site visits when they introduced transcripts on their podcasts. And that is directly because transcripts, like you can actually search them, and so it's showing up. So so search traffic, customer like signups, or like whatever the metrics that your organization usually uses. And that's usually like with marketing, although it could be that the product team has access to those as well. So yeah, I would start with those metrics. So unfortunately, it's a bit hard, kind of like improved UX. It's a little bit difficult to prove. But yeah,
quantifiable, like other tools that can go there and say, here's the score for your accessibility website.
To score your accessibility, yeah. So there are tools that you can score your own accessibility. They're automated scanners. Yeah, and I encourage you to do those. They don't do everything, obviously. They're automated, but it's a good place to start. Just go like do that this evening or tomorrow morning. Go to your company's website homepage and just run one of the automated scanners. Just Google like accessibility scanner, and then you'll get a few. There's Axe or ARC toolkit, like Lighthouse, whatever. Pick one of them and just run it, and then just see what happens, and then you'll just at least get a baseline in a sense. Yeah, so I really encourage automated tools and free tools as a place to start, because like why the hell not? Yeah.
And you get sometimes a percentage, and you can actually compare how you deploy, and then you can see how it's increased from like 58% to 73%. So that's quite natural.
Yeah. So that's a good, and I will repeat the question. What you said to answer that is by doing the automated tools. Good. Collectively, we came up with the answer is like running the automation. It'll give you a percentage, or also just throw out the number of bugs, and so you'll have a before and after of like, yeah, we corrected 8 bugs, and our score went from this to this. It's only automated, but like at least it's something.
So is there a percentage sort of threshold that the government expects?
100. Unfortunately, accessibility is black and white when it comes to standards, but it is actually more so a process more than if your organization can show that you're putting efforts towards accessibility. That's what lawsuits in America have found, is that a website that is inaccessible, like they might get sued or something, but if the company can show like, yes, we know, and here's our plan, here's the efforts that we're putting to try to improve it, then that's like, okay, because it's hard to be accessible 100% all the time. So long as you're showing evidence. Okay, you had a question.
Can you speak a little bit about user testing for accessibility? And in particular, I'm thinking about the percentage of user tests that you want to dedicate to people with accessibility needs.
Yeah.
And how do you determine that? And do you often find that you have to go to different recruitment agencies to kind of like fill these quotas?
Yeah. And maybe you have an opinion on it as well. So the question is about user testing. So I can answer the last questions first. There are places where you can go specifically for to get disabled users. So people who use a screen reader natively and other assistive technology, or who are low vision, that kind of thing. And it is, just like any user testing, really valuable, because that kind of experience, you can't replicate it yourself. And so it'll really expose new things. The meeting accessibility standards is great and it's a minimum, but there's certain ways that people who use screen readers natively hack around a system, and make things work for them. And so having them use your product and show you how to use it for real, again, just like user testing is really valuable in that way. So the answer, the short answer is yes, you should be testing with disabled users is the answer to that question. Yes, there are organizations specifically that provide you a pool of people who meet certain accessibility needs that you can test directly against. When it comes to the percentage of how many, I'm not totally sure. And so Prey is also big accessibility nerd along with me. So what's your take on user testing?
This would depend on your product. So let's say an unknown, sorry.
You might have to come here, actually, that mic,
looking at your
this one
system.
is,
Oh, yeah. So yeah, this depends on your product.
You stay
just
here.
over here.
If your example is, let's say your business is, retirement home care, right? Let's say that's your business. You have a home page. You have to make that accessible for whatever reason. Then how user researcher usually split that market would be probably early entry or people who already considering changing. So if you layer accessibility on top of that, then if you say 1 in 4 is accessible, and depending on your focus right now, are you focusing on keyboard accessibility right now, then maybe you just focus on that, a type of disability that relies upon keyboard user. And if you have a mix of 10 users in your user research session, make at least 1 of them, or 1 in 4 would be 2 of them in that mix. And so it depends on how you split up your research. You already have research practice that's split up according to need. This is just another variable you add on top of. And that's how a few other companies who does that. And yeah, go to those. In that case, you can narrow down the criteria more. I want someone between this, anywhere between 45 to 65 plus planning retirement. I want someone who perhaps use something like a keyboard or a switch key or a tab or something along the line.
And also the organizations that do accessibility testing can guide you and support you as well. So you don't have to have all the answers. You can say that I know disability testing is really important. This is our product and this is what we're thinking about. What do you recommend as well? They're pretty good at not gouging you of you should test 100 people. They're pretty good at giving you that kind of advice as well. One thing that I wanted to just add on top of that, and then if you have more to say as well, that's totally cool, is that there's people in your office that might also be able to do some user testing. For example, I was just talking to Jules, and accessibility covers colorblindness, for example, and 8% of men are colorblind. Yeah, so Jules was saying how at their company, there was a significant number of 80% of the devs were colorblind. And so you just throw the app at them and see how they use it and how it is. And where I was working before, there were people who were dyslexic. And so it was really helpful to just get that person on and give it a shot as well. So you can even have in-house people who have disabilities, may not identify that way, but can help support you in that way as well.
That's awesome. Thank you. So I think what I'm hearing is, I'm just coming back to another point in one of your slides where you said be specific. And there's a range of accessibility needs. If we're specific on what we're looking for, is it reasonable to try to get the stats of the people in your target market that have those accessibility needs?
If all else fails, use the generic 1 in 4.
Right. And try to match that to whatever your testing range is. Yeah, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, cool. No worries,
Another fun tip on finding user is so we were really desperate. One of our low vision user dropped out of testing, and so we looked around the office. Go, who's wearing glasses? And go, what's your prescription? Can you test without your glasses on? Thank you. Done.
Amazing.
And there are some simulators as well. So not for all, but there's certain, for example, visual disabilities you can simulate in your browsers while you're working on stuff. As either developer or designer, you can just do the high level testing with different type of color blindness or contrast or things like that. You can emulate even pretty severe vision impairments. That's just browser plugins, so you can look for those as well.
Interesting. Thanks.
Yeah. So It's just talking about different simulators and stuff. But again, that has to do with like chunking it down. Again, accessibility can get really overwhelming really quickly because there's a lot to do. And there's a lot of things to think about and, you know, all this kind of stuff. So like take a breath and then just like pick one thing and stick with that one and see it to the end and then go on to the next thing because yeah, it's better to get something done than like nothing at all, you know?
Are there any common design patterns that you see in like in the old days? It used to be don't do pop-ups, you know, all these magic JavaScript, dynamic JavaScript. Like,
Yeah.
what patterns are there that we might see in our products that we could say to our designer, hey, that's going to be really hard for people to use?
So color contrast is a really common one. Focus states. So when something receives keyboard focus, it doesn't change at all. Or it changes in a way that doesn't have good color contrast anymore because the button, it's white text and then the button goes light because that's one of your colors, but you can't see it anymore. So check the focus state. Again, that's why I emphasize keyboard. And then just like grays. I hate grays. And using gray to make things not that obvious. But you know, when you end up having grays, you start, if the contrast is too low, then you can't read the words anymore. Like placeholder text, for example, you can't read placeholder text, let alone there's whole problems with placeholder text. But yeah, I hate gray. And so when I first see gray, I always test the color on that one. So it's not that you can't use gray, but there's a tendency to pick grays that are very light because they're trying to achieve something, and that thing that they're trying to achieve is not accessible. Yeah. Those would be just like on the top of the head.
Yellow.
Oh, yeah.
Yellow, any shades of yellow to orange, just be warned.
Yeah, yeah. Those are really tricky colors as well.
What about like I know like a lot of this is like super applicable with web, but what about mobile apps?
Yeah, so I say web accessibility. I should be saying digital accessibility more broadly because it's basically any digital assets that we have. So it's our web, it's our mobile apps. WCAG was written, I mean, it was updated just this past year, but the main body of it was written in 2008 and then again in 2018 when mobiles were just like not a thing. So the amount of like rules that we have around mobile are quite limited, and you know they're working on it, whatever, but it takes time, just like laws, right? But essentially all of the rules that apply to web apply to mobile as well. So you still want good color contrast, you still want the codes behind under the hood to be good, that kind of thing. Yeah, so it still applies. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was fascinated by what you said about boomers being the first meme generation. What is that like? Where does that come from? How can I read more about that?
Honestly, it was a conversation that I was having with somebody. But it's kind of like Google it, I guess. Yeah, it's just the idea that like up till then, you know, we were like you were a child and then you like initially like even teenagehood like didn't exist. Back in like the 50s, like you were a small child and then you were an adult and that was kind of it. So just this idea of like individuality and like being catered to and that kind of thing. And that's why our parents are all grumpy and think that they are entitled to everything because, I don't know. Yeah. I love my mom, sorry.
Also, it's like in some, depending on which country you're operating with, it's like often it's like tied to the just post-war era. Because during the war era, it's like the ration, be selfless, all that stuff. But then that's that generation right after any big wars in those regions where they start to go, I can now ask for more. I can now be, that's
often. So
that's a great point.
So the generation before in like Western culture is the silent generation. And it was because of all of the hardship of the First World War, Second World War. And it was like you go, you be happy you're not in a war, you have a job, you work in that job your whole life. Like that's it.
Do you have something?
Yeah, I don't want to pull that thread.
Which thread?
Just talking about kind of web and like, is there any thinking or have you got any thoughts on post web? So the future of accessibility, like for me, that's always
like AR, VR.
I mean, obviously, exactly AR, VR is the thing, but like, I don't know, I was watching there's a show, these guys are this all disability in a house. It's on TV.
Oh yeah.
It's on last night, I think.
Okay.
And one of the guys has got a bit of brain damage and he can't read and write, so he's using WhatsApp and he had to get some attention to record the messages.
Yeah.
And that for me is just, you know, it's the future. Obviously we're going to be talking about computers, blah blah blah. Like, but I haven't personally encountered any real guidelines around that space yet. And I mean, in our work, we've had examples of that where someone's on the phone and they're anxious and they can't have the conversation. So to be able to facilitate that accessibility would be amazing. If you've got
I mean, I guess we're still talking kind of broadly, so it's hard to say specifics. I mean, I can say about when it comes to technologies like and innovations, a lot of innovations have been created because of accessibility. So our touch screens, for example, have been created because of accessibility accommodations. People who can't, press buttons and have the strong enough dexterity to press buttons, they created touch screens, and now we all use that. Voice to text and like assistive like Series and all that kind of stuff. That was again an accessibility consideration that is now widely used. So when it comes to technology, like there will always be technology and innovation, and accessibility will always be really intricately linked. And then, but on the flip side as well, there'll always be a need for accessibility considerations, because as we continue to develop those innovations, we kind of go and run with it. And then just like our analogy at the beginning, when we build a building, we don't think about accessibility. When we're creating our VR worlds and doing this and whatever other technologies, if we're not thinking about accessibility, then that can be falling on the wayside, even if that technology was made for people who have accessibility needs. That's kind of like a big, lofty answer to that question. But I think as we continue to develop technology, we need to be thinking about who all of our users are. And those users are going to have all sorts of different needs, regardless of what the technology looks and sounds and feels like.
Yeah. I guess whatever the major platform is, the current state, I would still drive and accessibility standards, let's say. So like it's still probably if you think core right now.
Yeah, like that's the thing that we always go back to.
Yeah.
And then we build off there using user testing and the things that we learn more and more about different people. But that's kind of the standard that we're always building on.
Is that an international standard, or is that New Zealand's?
Yeah, it's international. It's written by the W3C, so who makes decisions about the internet. And then basically they wrote this guideline, and then all the countries basically are like, yeah, do that. And so they all basically point to that. Some of them have exceptions here and there, or just modifications on it, on small things. But basically everyone's just points to that and just do that. Yeah. Did you want to add that?
So I've been thinking a lot about something like that. So we want to, I guess, I hate the word future proofing, but I guess medium term proofing, that if you are a kind of people, like a group of people who are providing content or something that needs to be read, interacted with online, is there a text version for that?
Yeah.
Because if there isn't, machine can't read it or will misinterpret it. Because if you look at all the pictures, machine's getting better at describing pictures, but the intent behind someone sitting down, are they upset, or are they angry looking, or are they actually happy, or are they making a joke at someone? That intent needs to be in text. And what you could do today is by providing those intents behind images, screenshot, help guides, whatever, in text, so that machine can read it and then interact with whoever who's speaking to. Please go to menu. If your menu isn't called menu, it's called 3 dots, then how is a machine going to help you interact with that interface? And so lining up that image or iconography with the language the user will be using, or telling the user what these things are called now, would help with whatever in the medium term.
Yeah, nice.
Do you have a question?
Oh yeah, I was going to say, so one of the things that is top tip for everyone in the room when you're presenting to stakeholders about accessibility is here's who else is doing it. So I just wanted who are the top kind of companies at the moment to be hey, stakeholders, these guys are doing it really
so
well.
Zero is always been really focused on. Pretend that's still true. I don't know what that place is saying, but they have an in-house accessibility team. I guess it depends on what your field is. It's probably easier than to just start listing off places, because the thing is you talk to those companies and then they're like, oh, actually we have so much to do, and actually but they're still leagues ahead of other people. Zero is really good with it. Totra is also really good with accessibility.
Another example could be search engines are basically blind. So if you want to be on Google, you have to be accessible. Otherwise, you're not going to be listed in the top.
Yeah, that's true. It's
blind basic. So it's the same thing.
yeah, it's good for SEO. I mean, yeah, you got your Googles and your Microsofts, a whole bunch of like American companies like Skyscanner and Adobe and Shopify and who else do I know? Like Kohl's Supermarket, they had a huge lawsuit in Australia, so they're like now the #1 company for accessibility.
That's probably a good way to frame it, right? Like, avoid the lawsuits.
yeah, that's always a big. That's always a big
Beyonce
push,
website.
yeah. I mean, we could talk more about like, I didn't include this one, but like the things that business cares about 3 things. It's revenue, costs, and risk. So they're always the 3 things. And so when we're talking to business stakeholders, we always want to bring it back to at least one, if not more of those things. So for example, the legal thing, that's risk. That's why it always comes up, because they're like, what's the risk here? Because if we don't have to do it, it's not a risk, we're not going to do it, right? But then we also talk about revenue. That's why a lot of my talk was about revenue, because that's a really strong driver, as well as costs. So if those are the 3 things that are the most important to business, and we always want to bring it back to those 3 things. And competitive advantage falls within that as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Is there any final questions?
We can also like stay like chat afterwards, I guess, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I assume we're allowed to stay.
Well,
but yeah.
thank you very much for an enlightening presentation. That is a wrap. Thank you so much. Enjoy the pizza. Awesome. Thanks, team.
Nice framing.